This is insane. David Stearns' master plan has been revealed, and it's got an impact on the entire team, and we are looking at the offense today. We're going to hear from the skip, Carlos Mendoza. We're going to hear from President of Baseball Operations, David Stearns. But before we do that, I want to welcome you back to Mets Digest. I'm your host today, Mike Duda, and as always, I like to start off with some statistics. And today's stat is that 73.6% of you that watch these videos are not subscribed. So please do me a favor, do us a favor here at Mets Digest, and hit that free subscribe button. That way we can bring content to you about the amazing. So without further ado, let's hear from the skip, Carlos Mendoza. Here's what he had to say after the Mets' brutal loss to the Chicago White Sox yesterday in a 9-4 fashion. He said, quote, "We've got to get better with runners in scoring position. We are all aware of it." And yes, the skip is completely correct. The Mets have a .212 batting average with runners in scoring position this year as a team. That is fourth worst in the bigs, only behind the Chicago White Sox, Baltimore Orioles, and Texas Rangers. The White Sox, of course, the second worst team in baseball in terms of record. And we talked about the Baltimore Orioles yesterday in our Cedric Mullins video. Go check that out if you haven't already. And that being that they're not that good. They are the third worst team in baseball according to record. So not very good company that the Mets are in that category. And it doesn't get much better when we talk about high leverage situations. The Mets have a .221 batting average in those situations, 21st in the bigs. And don't worry, we'll talk about what high leverage situations are in just a little bit. But first, we need to hear from the President of Baseball Operations, basically the general manager, in David Stearns. He said, quote, "I do not look at batting average with runners in scoring position or any of those runners in scoring position result stats. I will look at how we are controlling the zone with runners in scoring position, what types of counts we're getting ourselves into with runners in scoring position, or with leverage moments in the game." Now, this is what Stearns said about 2 weeks ago, but I think it's really prominent right now after the Mets had a bad loss to the second worst team in the bigs in the White Sox and only went 2 of 12 with runners in scoring position. And as we heard from the statistic earlier, that's been a season-long problem. So what I'm going to do here is break it down into each of the sections that Stearns is talking about and what he looks for. So the first part of the quote that we need to talk about is, quote, "How are we controlling the zone with runners in scoring position?" Now, I'll break this down a little bit further in a video on Sunday where I get a lot more analytical, but for now, let me define what I think he's referring to with some more basic statistics, even though they are still advanced stats found on Baseball Savant. I think what Stearns is talking about is a combination of the counts that his hitters are seeing, let it be 3-1 or 0-2, and the difference between those counts, the amount of pitches seen in at-bats by his hitters, where you, of course, want more pitches seen by the hitters, lets them see the pitcher more, gets the starting pitcher out earlier, gets them to the bullpen earlier, which is better. I think he's also talking about some of these advanced stats, whiff percentage, chase percentage, and some of these zone percentage stats that you see on your screen here. So let's go ahead and talk about what they actually are. On the screen, I have every single Met that has taken at least one at-bat so far this year and what each of their 5 percentage stats are. The first one is zone percentage. This is simply what percentage of the time is the opposing pitcher throwing a ball in the strike zone. It doesn't matter what the hitter does, if the hitter swings or not, makes contact or not, irrelevant for this particular statistic. This stat is simply how much of the time is a pitcher throwing the ball in the zone. The MLB average is 48.7% of the time. The Mets overall as a team are facing 50.3%. So they are facing more strikes, more balls in the zone than a normal MLB team is. Next thing that we got to go over is zone swing percentage. And all three of these zone stats correlate with one another. The MLB average for this stat is 67%. And this simply is what percentage of the time does a hitter, or in this case a team, swing at the balls that are inside the strike zone, and in this case the Mets are 65.9% as a team. So they're a little bit less aggressive with the balls in the zone, despite seeing more balls in the zone than an average MLB team. Last thing that we got to talk about is zone contact percentage, where the MLB average is 82.1, and the Mets are slightly above that at 83.6. Zone contact percentage is the percentage of time in which you make contact with the balls that you swing at that are in the strike zone. So if you swing at 1,000 pitches that are inside the strike zone and 863 of them you've made contact, that means your zone contact percentage is 83.6, like the Mets overall is. Last two stats that we have to go over is chase percentage and whiff percentage. I think both of those are pretty self-explanatory. The former being what percentage of the time do you chase or do you swing at a pitch that is outside the zone, and the latter one being whiff percentage, which is what percentage of the time do you swing and miss or swing and whiff on the ball. Mets in chase percentage are 26.2%, MLB average is 28.4, and as for whiff, the MLB average is 25, and the Mets are 24.6. So overall, they're not chasing. That's good. They're not whiffing on as many pitches as the MLB average is, but they're swinging less despite seeing more pitches in the zone. So I think David Stearns wants to see this team be just a little bit more aggressive at the plate. Now, part two of Stearns' quote is what types of counts we're getting ourselves into with runners in scoring position. Again, I'll talk a little bit more on this in detail on Sunday's video, but for now, let's go ahead and go over every single count and what the Mets are hitting in those counts as a team. So I'll go in order of best to worst average, starting with the best hitters count at 3-1, where the Mets are hitting 287. 1-0, the Mets are 283. 2-0, they're 272. 2-1, 265 average. 3-0, they're hitting 258. 1-1, so now we're in the even counts. 213. 2-2, 174. And then full counts 171, 1-2, 161, and their worst batting average as a team comes in 0-2 counts at 158. So this is a common theme in the sport of baseball. Major leagues, minor leagues, little league, whatever it is, when you're ahead in the count as a hitter, when it's 3-1, 2-0, 2-1, 3-0, those kind of counts, 1-0, you're going to be more aggressive and you're likely going to hit better than you are in an even count or when you're behind in the count. And the Mets are no different. They have a 262 average when ahead in the count, 213 when even, and 186 behind. Now, to go to my point earlier that I don't think the Mets are being aggressive enough, and I think that's where Stearns has a problem, is the amount of at-bats the Mets are in each of these situations. The Mets have 1,525 counts in which they were ahead so far this year, compared to 1,187 when they're even. But here's the thing. There's 4 more different possibilities and 4 more different options to be ahead in the count as compared to even. And then when you look at the Mets being behind in the count, they've taken 2,020 at-bats from behind in the count. So the problem with the Mets is they're getting behind in the count too often, and then they're not producing. And the perfect example of this is Tyrone Taylor. We talked about him in yesterday's video. Go check that out. It was about Cedric Mullins, if you haven't already, in which we talked about him being a below-average MLB hitter with an OPS plus below 100. Look at this. When he is ahead in the count, Tyrone Taylor is hitting 353. But when he's even and behind, 191 and 143 respectively. So the Mets are just not getting ahead in the count enough to propel this offense to Stearns' liking, in my opinion. Now, the last part that David Stearns was talking about is, quote, with leverage moments in the game. So again, I'll also dive into this a little bit more on Sunday, but simply, in low leverage situations, the Mets are hitting 256, medium leverage situations, 234, and high leverage situations, 241. Now, what do these mean? A low leverage situation is when the game's really not that important. It'll probably be a blowout. A team will probably be up by a couple of runs, 4, 5, 6, or more. And then medium leverage situations are a little bit more than low leverage situations. So maybe the beginning of the game, maybe middle innings when it's a difference of maybe 2 or 3 runs. But then high leverage situations is where Stearns wants the Mets to thrive, and they're really not. High leverage situations are in the 7th inning or later, in which the tying run or winning run is on base. And again, the Mets have just a 245 batting average in that area. And the best example here is Juan Soto. Why is Soto getting a lot of criticism? Because he can't hit with medium and high leverage situations. According to Fangraphs, his batting average in low leverage situations, 293. That's good. That's about 300. That's the kind of Juan Soto we want to see. But medium and high, 148 and 190 respectively. So Stearns is big on doing better with high leverage situations, and the Mets are just not doing that right now, which I think is a big part of their offensive problems. Now, there's a lot more to talk about on this topic, which is exactly what I'll be doing on Sunday when I go a little bit more into the analytics and specifically give statistics for those 0-2 counts, for example, with runners in scoring position, or those 2-strike counts with runners in scoring position. But just know for now, I believe what Stearns is alluding to in this big quote is that the Mets are not doing well enough in two-strike counts because they are not seeing enough pitches and because they are not aggressive enough. And I also think the Mets just simply need to do better in high leverage situations. And I think that will please the president of baseball operations, David Stearns, the manager, Carlos Mendoza, and will continue to win more and more games. But as for now, that's all the time I have for you. As always, thank you so much for watching, and let's go Mets.